Welcome to the art lecture series fall of 2022. We are, for the first time in almost 2 years, we're mostly in person, except for we're continuing the art lecture on Zoom so that more people can participate. I want to say a little bit about the art lecture series, that it presents a broad range of interdisciplinary approaches to contemporary art issues by artists and writers, activists and scholars. The ongoing aim is to bring an array of practices from a variety of fields, areas of inquiry and creative production that are active in the world that's beyond and within our campus. The series provides a lively forum for the exchange of ideas between the speakers, students, faculty, staff, and the public. All the lectures are going to be online, live streamed, streaming webinars, and they're free and open to the public. I just want to give a quick list of who is coming this fall. We have 4 lectures. Today, we want to warmly welcome Park McArthur. Next one is in 2 more weeks. Week 4 on the 19th of October, we have Hilma's Ghost, which is a feminist collective with Danielle Tegeter and Sharmista Ray. In week 6 on November 2nd, we have Nagara Kudumu, who will be joining us. And then in week 8 on November 16th, we have Elizabeth Houston. You can find profiles of the kinds of work that these people are bringing on our website, which is sites.evergreen.edu/art-lecture-series/home. And there you can also find, there are talks that have been archived, videos that you can see of the great talks that have been going on for about 10 years, so quite a while. I'd like to quickly acknowledge where we are situated, at least our college in Olympia, Washington. This is the Salish tribal land statement to say that the general practice of a land acknowledgement was inspired by in 2015 by calls to action contained in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada. That's sort of where this has started. The point is to acknowledge and help redefine how we place ourselves in relation to histories that have been misrepresented. This Evergreen State College is located on the ceded territories of the Medicine Creek Treaty tribes, which include the Squaxin Island tribe, the Nisqually Indian tribe, and the Puyallup tribe of Indians. And this area was historically a center for trade and exchange among many Salish Sea tribes, including the Chehalis and the Skokomish, and that these are active community members within our college. We have a longhouse, we have a Indigenous path and faculty and programs. So it is part of our college. I want to say that to acknowledge that accompanying Park McArthur, we have 2 ASL interpreters, Mary Herman, who's with us right now, and Stephen Palmer, who will be relief. And now I'd like to introduce Jade Baker, who will introduce our speaker, Park. Thanks, Jade.
Hi, thank you, Sha. Hello, everyone. I'm Jade. This is my first year at Evergreen, my first time back in college after almost a decade away, and my first time introducing an artist, so please bear with me. The program that I'm in, Engaging Collectively Through Art and Critical Social Psychology, is the reason why I decided to continue my education and attend Evergreen. I have been interested in the ways in which art plays a significant role in social justice work for a number of years now, and I'm continually redefining what art activism is. I am inspired by the works of activists who use their art to put focus on societal structures that I have seen as inherently flawed, as I'm sure all you have too. This is why I have a pull to create. I have been forced to see the disparities of our society firsthand. And when I have an ability to put those injustices into art, it allows for me to reach others on a deeper level that words couldn't do on their own, which is why I'm delighted to introduce Park McArthur. McArthur's work, while consisting of a variety of different mediums, often centers on critiques of institutions and how dependency, autonomy, and access are thought about in regards to disabled individuals. I found myself reading through interviews and writings about one exhibition in particular titled Ramps. She says, quote, "It didn't start out as an art project, but as an attempt to participate in art as an artist in a very inaccessible city." Ramps was located at Essex Street in New York. It consisted of a large printout of the Wikipedia page address for Marta Russell and 20 ramps that she had gathered from galleries and residencies, many of which had been put there specifically for her because of her request for access. Seeing the ramps in the gallery and learning about Marta Russell, a disability rights activist and author of the book titled Beyond Ramps, gave me a multifaceted perspective that I haven't completely unpacked. The layers of meaning and intention behind each of her exhibitions is incredible. There's so much more that could be said about Park McArthur and the work that she does, and now we get the honor of learning from her firsthand. Please welcome Park McArthur.
Yay, thank you, Jade. That was so wonderful as an introduction, and Shaw for bringing me here. I'm thrilled to return to Evergreen and to get to learn a little bit about what you're studying, Jade, the different classes that are here and what brought you back, particularly to this college. Thank you for the introduction. Shaw was reminding me before we gathered that we've had classroom visits in our apartment. I've gone to a Zoom class as part of one of her colleagues, Steve Rowland's class. And so it is a thrill to be back with you. However, virtually, I'm 3 hours ahead in central New Jersey, Lenape land. And I'm just glad to be in our time and space together. So again, my name is Park McArthur, and I'm going to share a number of artworks somewhat chronologically, and even some works that are still being finished or being resolved, even though they've been started years ago. So I think one thing I'd like to emphasize is process and ways that artworks and your understandings of them change over time, even when you're the author or the artist of the work. I'm thrilled that you spoke to the exhibition Ramps, Jade. Thank you for bringing that in. I'm actually not going to talk about that work specifically today, but as anything that you've read online or other works, I'd be happy to speak to those. So I know there's a chat Q&A that I believe hopefully you all have access to. And I'll try to be mindful of things that come in. I know that sometimes thoughts or questions come up as we're looking at images together. And so though there will be some time for Q&A at the end of the presentation, if something occurs to you along the way, please do ask, and I'll do my best to answer in real time. A special guest today I do want to mention, because it both relates to some of the topics and experiences in my life that have led to making the art that I do, but also because she's here as one of the access providers is my Aunt Mary Herman. And I would say that though she herself is not deaf, growing up and being exposed to deaf culture and deaf community was one of the earliest experiences in my life where I was in spaces with pride and identification around disability. And so that will be a running theme in some of the work that I share. And I just wanted to thank her very much for being here today. And I also think my mom is here, but a big shout out to my mom as someone who I actually speak a little bit in the first slide. So I'm going to pull up images now. And I will maybe ask for some verbal feedback and just make sure that I am giving you guys the best view as possible. So, oh, not new slide. I'm going to view slideshow. Okay, so on screen right now, there should be a black background with a vertical image of an artwork that looks primarily text-based. There's a lot of words on a long museum wall label. It's a little bit hard to see probably from the view that you have, but I'll go into some of the text and concepts behind the work. And lastly, excuse me, just to visually describe myself. I'm a white person with long brown hair. I use a ventilator mouthpiece to breathe. I'm sitting in a room with a lamp behind me and a bookshelf as well. So again, on screen is an artwork that I first made in 2011. And it's one of the artworks that I first recognized as doing a number of things at once that I felt very excited about. It takes the form of a museum wall label with the title, the date, the material, and the courtesy line. The courtesy line on an artwork wall label typically describes who owns the artwork or who is lending the work for exhibition. And in this case, the courtesy line is hundreds of names long. It is the body of the artwork and is a kind of ongoing list of names. The list of names is everyone I can remember carrying or holding me, from my mom in utero to family members, my sibling, friends, care providers, lovers, someone who are one and the same, people who I describe because I don't know their names or I can't remember their names, nurses, flight attendants, spanning everything from lifelong relationships to very brief and mediated interactions that might be truncated or economized in some way. The artwork adopts the in-house style guides of the gallery or the institution where it's shown, meaning that the gallery or museum is responsible for formatting and printing the artwork, as they would any other wall label for any other artwork. I supply the text to the museum, and each time that the work is shown, I try my best to make sure the list of names is up to date. So when the artwork is reprinted, it might get a little bit longer each time. At the bottom of the wall label, which is about 40 inches long, there's a space of white text, or excuse me, white paper, where there is no text. So it's also inviting a kind of additional addition of names over time. When it's exhibited, it's installed on the wall, somewhat low, like any other wall label would. And it's accompanied by a sizable amount of space on the wall or in the middle of the gallery, such that there might be an artwork there. But instead, we're invited to think maybe about the space itself or a kind of placeholder where an artwork might go that this wall work is referencing. I'll just read again briefly the title and the materials of the artwork. So the title is called Carried and Held. And I list the date that it's made each time. And I think about the work as both unique, but also iterative. So it's not an editioned work, but it's a work that, again, is kind of both the same each time, but also slightly different because the names get added. So it was made in 2011, 2012, 2013, 2018, and 2021 thus far, but may continue into the future. Digital print on museum board, 40 inches long by 8 inches wide. This next image on screen is an artwork that's not mine, but is one that that helps provide some context and understanding to Carried and Held that we looked at just a second ago. I experienced this artwork, which is titled I Met, like the past tense of meet, by the conceptual artist Onkawara, Onkawara. This artwork was made between the years of 1968 and 1979, and it takes the form of lists of people's names who Onkawara conversed with, neatly typed and compiled into these gray binders, and the image shows 6 gray binders, 2 of which are open to pages with text on them, and you can see the names in these neat vertical lists. You can feel the weight of time passing, but also the kind of portability and the interaction that comprises this artwork's physical form. When I encountered I Met, I thought of these lists of names in relation to Carried and Held's lists of names, not only in terms of thinking about interactions that had happened, but also asking what makes up the act that's being remembered. So what does it mean to meet someone? Is it about a conversation? Does it need to have spoken or signed language? Could a glance or an eye contact be a meeting as well? Who do you come into contact but not necessarily meet? What is carrying and what is holding? Do I think about these things physically and emotionally, or is it about an inextricable tension between the two? I learned another aspect about this piece, which, whether or not is accurate, is something that is repeated in the art history around this artwork, which is that Onkawara began it and began requesting that people write down their names or give him business cards with their names on it as a practice of learning languages, precisely as a kind of generative debility practice that was accruing both materially and emotively through Onkawara's inability to remember or recognize names that use the Roman alphabet. So as someone who first learned Japanese, he was an artist living all around the world in Mexico City, Paris, New York, and he was actively learning these languages through people's names. So incapacity, or having to translate things in by kind of one's own means, as personal impairment and social constriction, requires this generative creativity and imagination in the face of normative modes and practices. And that was something that I was very attracted to in this artwork by Kawara. As a graduate student myself, I was navigating, this is a jump back in time, but as a graduate student, I was navigating my own expectations around what I would be able to do myself physically on my own, and what I wanted to do in my own art practice. And so one of the ways in which I navigated that was a series of text-based artworks that I was configuring as DEBTs, like DEBTS, a debt artwork. I was using graph paper and a typewriter to make little pictorial boxes of text artworks centered in the middle of the page. And I would begin each artwork with the words I, O, U. And then I would describe the artwork that I was wanting to give or provide an audience or to make. So that might be a song, it could be a painting, it could be a sculpture. And I would describe both the material aspects of it, but also the kind of sensuous or the emotive or the other aspects of the artwork, some of which kind of evade description. So configuring these artworks as DEBTs was something that might both arrive in the future, but might also never be made. And it kind of stayed within this kind of tension between both the presence of the debt that exists and the absence of the artwork that was promised. I'm going to next show just the, again, the art material of the artwork that we were just looking at, titled I Met from 68 to 79 by Ankawara. And it is cloth bound loose leaf binders with plastic sleeves inserted with printed matter, 11.5 by 11.75 collection of the artist. Another artwork that's on screen is an image of a sunlit scene with various boards and flat materials laid across a large expanse of sand. And this is a scene that was collectively made. It was at an artist residency, and fellow residents made this pathway for my wheelchair to travel across the sand. And taking the image at the time meant that I thought about the image a lot, and then probably 3 or 4 years later decided to print it as a photograph, and felt like a tangible example of the ways in which many times access is something that's collectively improvised or made when it's not always institutionally or policy-wise provided. And even when it is provided, many times there are responses or adjustments or both things that happen in real time or in feedback that the access provisions have to be adjusted or changed. So in many cases, these practices of access are inseparable from cross-disability community providing their own needs or providing our own needs. And I'm often both wanting to pay attention to moments in my life where I see that type of collective action taking place. And I'm also looking out for it or excited by seeing this in, long traditions and histories within different archives. I feel grateful to witness ways in which cultural practices around disability that value access practices for how ubiquitous, but also kind of special that they are. So I'll show again, the title of this artwork is How to Get a Wheelchair Over Sand from 2013. It's a digital C print. It's 8.5 by 11 inches, and it's an edition of 5 + 2 artist proof. The next image on screen is of two much more famous artists, and they are at a gallery opening for a gallery from a New York gallery called Just Above Midtown. And this is an image from an oral history archive about the gallery just above Midtown. And there's actually a show that just opened at the Museum of Modern Art that would be up through, I think, January 2023, about the history of Linda Good Bryant's space and the exhibitions that she programmed for 20 years, and what the legacies and history of this program, which exhibited many artists of color, but also artists working across media and really trying to blur lines both between what we think of as artistic disciplines and performance and dance in many ways that were not being done at the time. The close-up that we're looking at, which is an image of the artist Valerie Maynard and the singer Stevie Wonder, with Valerie describing one of her sculptures to wonder. There is a tension and curiosity and connection, which is depicted, and which artworks engender. If we follow what the scholar and historian Tina Campt, C-A-M-P-T, has invited us to do, and not just look at images, but also listen to images, we try to hear and think about what's going on inside of the image. We notice that this tight crop on Maynard's and Wonder's faces gives us a moment into what's happening between them, but what's also cropped out of the photograph. It feels like a busy, populated space, although we don't see other people. There might be music playing in the background. It feels like an exhibition opening. Both Maynard and Wonder are dressed up. It feels like there might be conversation. And we're invited to imagine both the celebratory, but also the kind of quiet, pensive moment that's happening between these artists. I bring in a kind of moment from the archive because I realize more and more that many of the artworks and the art historical moments that influence me are ones that I've not personally experienced. And I'm increasingly amazed by art's capacity to reach us, even when we're not the ones necessarily going to that gallery opening or going to that museum. But through the narrative retelling or oral histories or friends telling you about a show that they saw, or reading an essay or an art historical account, or listening to an interview, there are ways in which these artworks circulate and travel beyond their physical form. And I find myself now and in my art practice thinking more and more about what an experience of an artwork is and how we might have multiple ways of thinking about that. Not that we want to take away necessarily from being able to experience or witness an artwork in a time and place, but that many, again, of the artworks that I think of having influenced my conception of art are ones that I've not seen in person, ones that I've only heard or read about. The caption for this photograph is artist Valerie Maynard describing her sculpture to Stevie Wonder. Sorry, I have to move my cursor, from 1975, just above Midtown Gallery, 50th West 50 West 57th Street. The photographer is unsighted. Okay, jumping forward in time from 1975 to 2016, I'll show about 3 more artworks and then we'll wrap up and shift. I've actually done exactly what I said I wouldn't do, which I haven't been looking at the Q&A, but maybe I'll do that now briefly. No open questions. Okay, I'll keep moving on. The artwork on screen right now is a sculpture, but it's also a large blank sheet of paper. So I think about this within a framework of dependency, both for its material means, but also a more kind of conceptual use of the word dependency. And I became increasingly curious about the etymology or the roots of dependency, where that word comes from, how we can use it to think about this social experiment of being alive. And dependency with the word pending is hanging between moments or states of being. It's also about growing out of something else. So it's both a hanging off of and a growing out of another entity or body. This also comes from the French by Latin for relier, to be able to fall back on and land. So there's a kind of a trust fall, or a way that you might be able to depend on someone. So this abstract piece of paper might not necessarily hold all of those concepts, but I was thinking about making surfaces or substrates, or for lack of a better word, kind of, yeah, blank or open surfaces that could receive figures or mark making or representational I guess document or mark making on top of it. So it's kind of, these artworks are maybe awaiting figuration or awaiting text. They're pending, they're kind of in between these two states. So this particular series of work is called Polys, P-O-L-Y-S. And that's named for polymer granules that are a mid-20th century invention that many of you might know from their use in disposable diapers or pads. And it's basically a powder that when water is added to it becomes a gel. So it holds the liquid and it doesn't let the liquid fall out. And so I was wondering what this absorbent powder would do if it were made or mixed with paper, and how could one make a highly absorbent paper? How could this paper become the surface that could absorb both ink and paint related material, but bodily fluids as well, and all different kinds of representational materials. So like many biochemical materials, this polymer also yellows over time. So it's an artwork that this photograph was taken right after it was made, but fast forward 6 or so years, it's yellowed, the surface is drooping and changing a little bit. It's an artwork that's also kind of degrading or generating in its own way over time. On screen is another alternative view of how these polymer papers were shown. It also gives you a little bit of a sense of the scale. I worked with a paper maker to produce them at the size of a twin bed, So I think that's roughly 36 by 72. I'll show the art caption at the end of this, so we'll see if I'm right about that. I think I might be wrong. But these papers are shown both on the wall as well as on the floor. And they were shown with a series of sculptures that were other ways of thinking about both forms of care and survival and pleasure and different kind of mediating materials that go alongside those ongoing processes. So in this image are two white plinths with trays, kind of like trays that you might find at the dentist's office when they have the different scary dental instruments on them. But in this case, these trays have lots of different kinds of single-use items. Things like tubing, things like vinyl and rubber gloves, dental dams, saran wrap, condoms, hand warmers. I was imagining these artworks in the tradition of the giveaway or the takeaway from Felix Gonzalez Torres, but in this case also, I guess his candies were also used, and in this case, also having these kind of single use items that might incorporate themselves into someone's day. These artworks are generally called contact trays, and I think I'll show the next slide, which again is the name of the paper pieces, Polys, P-O-L-Y-S, from 2016. So they're 1.5 inches thick by 74 inches long by 38.5 inches wide. And that's true. My anecdote was when we were installing the artwork, we also placed them vertically on the wall, and I learned that a standard twin mattress is also around the same customary size of a doorway, a little bit wider than a doorway. This is a closer up detail image of one of the contact trays that you can see a number of the single use prophylactic items that are all sealed and in this form unused, and they're stacked and kind of shoved in to the right angles of the tray. They almost look like they could kind of spill over or fall over at any moment. That's from 2015. It's titled Contact A, cling wrap, lubricant, latex glove, stainless steel tray. And the second to last artwork that I'll speak about is related to this idea of kind of the pending figuration of the paper pieces. And so these are highway signs that have only their flat color and border. And in this case, it's brown, and the US highway control and traffic guidelines say that brown designates a place of cultural significance or a historical site. So in this case, these two identical signs, which are highway sized and very large, I'll share the dimensions later, are hanging behind a museum visitor's desk, and you see the desk with many chairs and computers. It happens to be empty. There aren't any visitor services personnel, and in this case, it's installed in the lobby of the Whitney Museum of American Art. And I was curious about this particular location, both for being a early point of contact inside of the institution, but also because in this image to the right of the image are basically wall-sized windows that look out onto the West Side Highway and the Hudson River. And so you're not only looking at an actual highway, they're also navigating and wayfinding signs on the highway itself, just to the other side of the window. And in a very kind of explicit and crude way, these signs were trying to use the standardized language of a cultural site to ask also what was here before the museum, what is the museum itself now, and what might be here in the future after the museum is gone. The title for that artwork is called Another Word for Memory is Life, from 2017. They are painted anodized aluminum, which is just aluminum that's treated so that it doesn't rust, and it has reflective tape on it. These are 2 panels, and each panel is 90 inches tall by 120 inches wide. An early predecessor for, sorry, this is a digital rendering of the artwork, so I apologize that it looks a little funny on screen, but a predecessor for Another Word for Memory is Life. And some of my initial thinking around signs, designation, wayfinding, iconography are the kind of ubiquitous reserve parking signs that are used for handicap reservation, or the kind of generally the two or three reserved parking spaces that you might find in a parking lot. And I both thought about both the standardization and why there might be 2 or 3 in the parking lot when there might be many more people who need them. Also, in terms of being a wheelchair user, my questioning around the wheelchair icon as the umbrella symbol for disabilities that are much more expansive and look and feel and are different than just being a wheelchair user. And so I was thinking about iconography, and I was imagining again these abstracted or these surface area substrates to be places where new kinds of mark making or other forms of iconography could be placed or could reside in the future. So they're kind of, again, awaiting figuration. So the image on the screen is a series of 5 identical blue signs, and they have white borders around them. They have rounded corners, and they're made in the color and the format of these reserved parking signs. This artwork is titled Blanks. It's from 2014. It's a digital print on aluminum with 5 unique parts, and they're each 18 inches tall by 12 inches wide. I'm going to switch over now to share a more recent artwork from 2020, and I've traced some of the ways in which I've used or been excited about the possibilities for language and text within visual art. And in this last example, it is both a sound piece, but it's also a transcript. So I'm going to put the transcript in the chat if you'd like to follow along and read it. And I'll also put the link to the artwork. It exists as, in its primary form, it exists as a sound piece that is still hosted online by the museum, which is named Kunsthalle Bern in Bern, Switzerland, Bern, Switzerland. And the invitation to make an exhibition was one that I guess used to think about traveling through the museum and what might be described in moving around the museum itself, how we might think about the specific gallery halls, the spaces between the galleries, the elevator, also how you get to and from the museum itself in terms of the bus routes. And so the primary artwork made for this exhibition is this audio guide, which invites you to both kind of be in two places at once. So we're all sitting or lying down or standing wherever we are in time and space, but the audio guide maybe invites a kind of movement or transposition to the Kunsthalle Bern in Switzerland. The portion I'll play is one that describes the elevator, and it's a particular kind of elevator that is primarily used to transport artworks, but it's also used when needed as a passenger elevator. I thought about using the audio component of the artwork to put other audio artworks inside of it. So there will be a part of this section where I play a work from 2013 as part of this audio piece. So it's not a work that was playing in the round inside of the elevator. It was only one part that exists kind of inside of the description, which I hope makes sense. If it doesn't make sense, ask me about it in the Q&A and I'll do my best to explain further. So I'm going to go off of this for a second, and if I could get a visual or verbal cue that the sound is working for you all, that would be super helpful.
This is from the entrance hall.
Sorry.
Yes. Yep.
Okay, great.
Elevator.
Thanks.
Leaving RSL through an open doorway, we re-enter the entrance hall. The elevator rises from the entrance hall's gray granite floor like a secret. Its cab is enclosed on two sides and doesn't have a front or a back door. In its lower position, the elevator disappears, leaving only the large square outline of its lid in the stone flooring. An artwork is inside this description of the elevator. This artwork is an audio recording made while tracing a small room with a power wheelchair. Reaching the room's edge and turning the corners, the wheelchair's back wheels bump into a clothing rack and metal hangers chime. The artwork is as follows. Untitled, 2013. MP3, 6 minutes and 58 seconds. Edition AP of 1 and 1 artist's proof.
I'll scrub forward that file plays for another few minutes and I'll give you the last part of the description.
Park, we can't hear it. We stopped after the first one and we haven't been able to hear since.
Kunsthalle Bern's elevator was added
Okay.
to the building in 1989.
Can you
Though
hear
it serves as a passenger elevator, it was intended to move equipment and artwork. The elevator is a type of lift known in German as Niederfluraufzug, low floor elevator. It locks into place with low boom. Downstairs, the elevator opens into the building's kitchen. Through a door next to the kitchen sink is infraroom gallery.
Okay. I'm putting the link to the artwork in the chat and the transcript as promised. I apologize, I wasn't able to do that while I was listening to it. I'm not quite that savvy yet. For the sake of time, I think I will end here and switch over to Q&A, and I'll keep my video on and just thank you again for having me. And I look forward to any questions or comments that you might have.
Yay, thank you so much, Park. I wish we had a room. I would like to invite everyone to do one of two things or a couple ways to ask questions and have a conversation with Park. One is, and you've already started to type in questions in the Q&A. The other is to raise your hand and then we would call on you and then you can actually, we won't have your video up, but we can hear your voice. And sometimes that's a really nice thing for the presenter to have a little actual human interaction, verbal human interaction. Okay. We've got one person that's raised their hand, so we could start with that and I can help with that.
Sure, yeah, we could start with the raised hand and then I'll also look at the Q&A.
Great, okay.
And then, sorry, just to do a time check for our interpreters, do we have a hard out at a certain time? It's by 12:30, is that right?
No, we're out at 1, so we do a half-hour Q&A, and I think our interpreters are aware of it going from 11:30 to 1.
Cool. We should have an internal conversation if not, then
Okay.
adjustments if needed. Okay.
Okay, yeah, and if we need to break or stop early, just let me know.
Super, thanks. Okay, hi, raised hand person, and you don't need to put your video on if you don't want to, or whatever's good.
See, yeah, I'm not seeing an option for video, but that's beside the point. So for polys 1 through 5, I remember hearing the paper was about the size of a twin bed. I don't remember if you said that was intended or not. And if so, how do I say this? Yeah, mostly just whether or not that was intended.
Yeah, great question. I love concrete questions like that of like, also, what is this and what size is it? And what's your intention about that? So absolutely the question was it intentional that the paper pieces be the size of a twin bed? And that is accurate if they are that size. I'm sure those things are different in different manufacturing places, but in this case, it was 72 inches by 38 about. And I was thinking about, again, this kind of connection between the substrate of the bed or the durational effects of both rest and leisure and pleasure, and also mark making on paper or representate, or what representing those things look like from a drawing or a painting or a two-dimensional perspective. And so they were actually a kind of interesting backstage version of that, is that when you're making paper, you make paper in something called deckle boxes, DECKLE, I believe, if you guys have made those. And those form the edges of the paper, and they're also extremely heavy. The paper pieces were really heavy because they have so much water content in them, and they have to be squeezed and pressed over time. And so there are these images of the paper residency group making the pieces and having to move them around in a coordinated effort, kind of like if you were moving a mattress from your apartment, but figuring out how to get them through doorways and also lay them flat. They were dried outside for a large period of time, bring them back inside, put fans on them. So the both in terms of the intention, but also the ways that the artworks were made, that type of that scale was an important component to the conceptual aspect of the work. I'd like to make more paper pieces. I've not made any since that series, and I'm thinking of making some maybe the size of pillows or other smaller pieces that also are, part of our kind of everyday life. Thanks for the question. So
Thank you.
Do you have a follow-up one? Did that answer your question?
Yes, that answered it well. No follow-ups. Thank you.
Okay, cool. Okay, so I got some appreciation and some thanks for sharing in the chat, which I always love. Thank you for sharing that. And there's, I like this one. It's from two people, somebody named Jasper and Carissa. I'll just read it out loud. I'm intrigued by your work with and presentation of raw materials of building, industry, and public infrastructure, and how these things are related to the body and the intimate. What drew you to working with these raw materials? What questions do you ask yourself when choosing specific materials to work with? Those are really, that's a great question. And maybe I'll kind of combine two questions at once to get a couple of them. Elia is asking, before I ask my question, I wanted to say, thank you for sharing your work with us. I love listening to your thought process and meaning behind your art. My question is, how has your thought process been shaped or changed over time? And has it impacted your outlook or your beliefs when it comes to bringing your art to life? Those are both really deep, awesome questions. And I feel like maybe relate to each other a little bit, but the short answer would be that yes, my thought process have been shaped and changed both by the artwork and the world changing over time. So I think as all of you in the audience probably feel on a daily basis, it's probably hard not to have your thoughts and understandings of the world change as you have new experiences, as you meet new people. And that's probably one of the beautiful things about art, is that you could make something 10 years ago and have a little bit of an inkling as to why you're making it, or maybe it's not fully transparent to you as to why you're compelled to work with certain materials and or processes. And these artist talks are an awesome and sometimes hilarious attempt to try to play like we know what we're doing and we have a fully confident assessment of why we're doing certain things. But I think some of the really intriguing and beautiful and frustrating parts of thinking about art making over decades is that some of those things aren't fully available to you at the time when you make them. And it's often someone, another person's thought or comment or your own experience of your work much later that you might come to have a better understanding of it. One concrete example for myself is I was thinking about foam, absorbent foam, and thinking about these industrial blocks of foam that change how a sound piece functions and are also kind of these large abstract looking artworks that look sort of like a minimalist monument, or basically just like a giant square box. But years later, I was realizing that I was attracted to the cushioning foam because I'm sitting on a cushion wheelchair, and these cushions are changed every 1 or 2 years. And they also change over time because your weight in your body is literally molding them, as the seats are also kind of molding your body. And so I was wanting to think about where and how these cushionings that you might find in both beds and couches and wheelchairs, where they come from and what they look like when there might be the raw material for 20 or 30 wheelchair cushions all together in one monolithic form. I wasn't fully aware of that thought process at the time, but as I've come to, think about or look at those artworks later on, it became more clear to me what I was trying to think about. And in some ways, it's the kind of collectivity of multiple seated figures at once that's inside of this this industrial piece of foam that then gets chopped up and sent out to multiple people, but trying to think about that collective space before it gets individuated and sent out and distributed. And romantically, probably trying to think about spaces of community or collective or just spaces of gathering that in our world, we typically find ourselves individuated or isolated or separated from one another.
Can I just interrupt and see, we had a couple of hands up, Tatiana and Manny, if you wanted to ask a question again, because the hands were taken down, but give you a moment if you want to raise your hand again and ask. Well, you're welcome. I want to invite you to do it. And in the meantime, we have plenty of stuff going on in the Q&A. So, here we have someone. Oh, they went down again. Don't be shy. Come on.
I get it. I'm a shy person. So
I know, me too. I know. It's not easy.
There's a great question about audience, which I
Great.
hope that kind of gave an example of the industrial material to speak to Carissa and, oh, did they go away? But Carissa and Jasper's question, but yeah, I'll try to think about that because there is, I think also in terms of like things like stainless steel or again, ramps that are made from materials that weren't intended to be ramps, I'm attracted to the way in which the built environment is both standardized, but also obviously highly contingent, and the ways that often to meet our own basic needs, we have to improvise and make contingencies on these standardized forms, which are, sites of control and power and negotiation with systems of power. And so I think sometimes using those materials like stainless steel or like a highway sign can be moments of, can be really possibly immediately recognizable. And I like thinking that if you see a piece of stainless steel, you might think that is like the knife in my drawer in my kitchen. It's like the grab bar that I see in the gas station restroom. It's like the bus stop railing that's near my house. It's a material that we encounter in public ways, but also in our private domestic spaces, and it spans all of those. It's made, it's railroad, it's Pittsburgh, it's like all of these things that have long histories that we also interface when we, again, touch the bus railing. So that's a messy answer for thinking that the specificity of material does kind of travel us through time and space when we think about using them artistically. So I'll loop back to a question from Zoe, who asks, how does having an audience for your work impact your view / perception of your work? And how does audience impact you? Does it feel, maybe how does it feel when you impact the audience? Or I might also say, relatedly, when an audience, impacts me, I think it is exactly in that question of back and forth and a kind of dialogic relationship that I would say, even when I wasn't exhibiting my art publicly, I think probably in the most basic form of art works as letters in a way where they might be to multiple people at the same time, and they might not only, or they might be to one person specifically, but they are spaces of possible communication or of at least time spent trying to write down or think about something over a period of time. So I often think of myself as an audience. I don't only think of myself as engaging an exterior audience, but I often think about myself as an audience to other people's art. And I think a lot of my desires for my own artwork stem from my experience as an audience and wanting to, again, to go back to the piece that Jade talked about at the very beginning, wanting to participate or be an audience member to other people's talks or other people's panel discussions or other people's exhibitions, that engendered both the ramps, but also the thinking about what kind of art space or exhibition would I like to make were I to be invited to make something. So I think what's wonderful about the question is there isn't so much a separation between myself and audience, or myself as audience, or an audience and myself. And I think one of the reasons I felt excited about making these audio guide or sound pieces, like the last artwork that I shared, is that you could potentially, I guess the conceit, whether it is true or not, is that you could potentially go to this art exhibition without leaving your home, or without purchasing the ticket, or without traveling to Switzerland. And that happens with music too, right? Or with the poetry. Meaning that there are some forms of art making that circulate and distribute themselves differently than the plastic arts. But I think even plastic arts like sculpture or painting, again, they can circulate in moments of description or retelling or rumor or slides. And these things are traditionally in art history, those are described as kind of a loss or a less than version of the artwork itself. Walter Benjamin talks about the postcard, or the complicated relationship about the loss of the aura of the artwork when it's reproduced photographically and sent out. But I think built in with that formulation is there could be, you know, a gain, or there might be other things that are going on there that that, you know, are kind of abundant, you know, expansive parts of how the artwork is functioning. So again, not so neat and tidy, but I think, yeah, the audience is thinking about the audience, and what I need as an audience member has brought me a lot of insight, or at least experimentation in my own work with what I want to make as an artist.
That's so great. We do have now a couple of hands raised. So
Okay.
should we start? Can we hit them? How are you doing, Park?
I'm doing well. I think
Okay.
maybe more
Okay.
questions.
Mary, Stephen, everybody okay?
Mhm.
Okay, thank you. All right, Kathleen.
Yeah, hi, Park. Thank you so much for your talk. This has been fantastic. I actually dropped this in the chat in case you want to also see it, but
Okay.
my question was, you know, I love the way that your work and you're talking about your work moves seamlessly, or seems to, between the conceptual and formal aspects and the personal and the political aspects. And so I guess my question was, are there seams there for you? Do you think about the relationship between the conceptual and aesthetic issues on the one hand, and our histories and our contexts as sort of in tension, as feeding one another, as in harmony? Like, what do you know, I'm thinking about, right? You talk about Ankawara's work and relate to sort of the history of conceptual work, and that your work is also both conceptual and really aesthetically appealing, and it's deeply personal and super political. So I'm excited by that blend, and I just wondered what you thought about the relationship between all those aspects. Does that make sense as a question?
I think it does. And how do you think about that? I guess I would be also sorry. I mean, it's not to just throw it back on you, but I do feel like maybe it's also coming from ways in which you're seeing those as not being separatable or separate from how you think about your work or how you experience it. If you, I don't know, if you want to share more in terms of a specific example, but
Yeah. Oh, I was just gonna say, I think about it differently with each artist, right? So you can have somebody whose work looks really institutional and ends up, actually being aesthetic by dint of sort of referring to a certain era once it ages, or like, oh, what's her name? The diaper series. Shaw, you might Mary Kelly, thank you. Yeah, it just took me a second. I just think depending on the artist, right? Like where I start with trying to work through what it is they're up to. Usually I start with the visual and the formal because I feel like everything else might swamp that if I don't start there. But yeah, I guess the themes are different with every artist. So I just was curious if you have a sense of where your work is or where those aspects sit for you.
Yeah, thanks. And also how you kind of appear alongside your work, right? Like I think in contemporary art, there's an expanded appetite now, which is amazing for both artist interviews and, best of lists or ways that artists are appearing as kind of figures alongside of their art practice in ways that maybe aren't totally new, but are more focused possibly on the person themselves in addition to the artwork that they make. And I think that's always a kind of exciting and interesting proposition for how much I think about, or how much one wants to add information, whether that's in a press release or whether that's before a show opens, or whether that's in an interview after a show opens, or in an artist talk. And so one thing I might think about one really concrete example, I don't know if this answers your question, but my work is being included in a new publication about the artwork Donald Rodney, who is a Black British artist who had sickle cell and made an artwork that is called Auto Icon, AUTOICON. And it basically is an artwork that exists and is cared for by multiple friends and webmasters as a kind of ongoing virtual artwork that exists beyond his passing. He died in the 90s. And in writing about that work, the author and I were talking about medicalized language of diagnoses and the ways in which Donald Rodney's diagnosis is part of how his work is being talked about, or he also talked about it that way. And in many ways, I've, as a disabled artist, have chosen to not foreground my diagnoses or think about the medical language that accompanies my experience of disability or debility, but to try to de-emphasize that because, not because it's not an intrinsic part of my life, and of course it gives me access in many medical institutions, but to treatment or to durable medical goods or things like that. And I understand its use, but because I'm interested in a cross disability kind of project, more of affinity and possible intimacy across ways in which people do and don't have diagnoses in a medical context. And so when I think about maybe the questions of the personal or the political or the material, a lot of these things come up in these kind of small details that both in the decision, they both open up whole different worlds of thinking and political commitments, but are also contextual. And so my rambling reason for bringing that up was because I thought maybe in a more intimate space of Donald Rodney's artwork being contextualized through his medical diagnosis, this would be a space to let an art writer or to provide the reader a explanation of my diagnosis or the use of my medicalized language around my disability, which I typically avoid in art writing or in press or in art press. And I thought maybe that's a space that is actually more about an artist to artist, even though I don't know Donald, we didn't meet. It's not that we're communing in this time and space, but that maybe there's a reason to have my artwork contextualized in this way as a kind of something that would accompany his. So those I find the project of thinking about, oh, how does the personal and the political arrive in your work to be not something that can really be predetermined or set out as like a goal. It's more in these approaches to these day-to-day questions that I find different strategies or approaches to be able to be available or to be thought about. That makes sense. And I think there are so many beautiful questions in the chat. I think maybe I'll take one more or wrap up soon, just for energy level, and to let everybody move on with their day. Did you say there was one more hand up, Shaw?
Yeah, Tatiana had their hand up twice and took it down. So one last chance, and meanwhile you could just take a look. There was another question about another artist that was brought from the past at the very last question here, and it's questions about sort of the lifetime of your work.
While we're chatting, I'm just putting Donald Rodney's artwork in the chat for anybody who wants to learn about it. They're really cool artist.
Oh, here's Tatiana. Tatiana, do you want to say your question since it's come up now?
Hi, yeah, I can read my question.
Okay.
I also posted it in the chat, and I'm just going to read what I posted. But thank you so much for sharing. I really enjoyed how you talked about and shared the specifics of the materiality of your art. I also enjoyed how much I felt like you used both material and human specific words when describing your intentions and process, like saying engendered instead of embodied or something similar. Like that's definitely something I want to use just when talking. I found it very interesting that the polymer paper was made in the size of a twin bed mattress or a doorway, like other people commented on. Like when I first saw it, even before you started talking about it, the first thing I thought of was like, I kind of want to sleep on that paper, like walk on the paper. I wonder what that would be like if someone was to touch it, and how would that react to it over time. And then when you mentioned it, like in relation to human specific like activities or actual question is like, how do you balance the human aspects of your art with the material or physical aspects of your art? And like you did a really good job of like eloquently being able to connect and explore the relationships between not just humans and objects, but like the actual material of objects. And I don't know, I guess, how do you connect all of those ideas or like think about connecting all of those ideas in your process of making art?
Thanks, Tatiana. That's a good question. I mean, sometimes things don't feel very balanced, right? And there has to be a recalibration or a reconsidering. And sometimes that comes from your internal recalibrating, and sometimes it comes from someone else telling you or an external feedback. And so, do you mean also the ways in which material questions might exceed or challenge what one is doing in a physical sense? Or I guess I would also think that those things can't necessarily, even if we tried to separate them, they don't necessarily separate so easily. And so again, maybe to go back to the debt pieces, I was trying to think about the material of this, of a song, or the material of a poem, or what would be breath and sound, or what would be text and speech, or what would be the materiality of painting. And of course, a painting could be a lot of different things, but then how we might think about describing what those things do or how those artworks function. So maybe the kind of base unit, or the way in which I start thinking about the connection between material life and this corporeal physical form that we have, is minds and bodies is just through note taking or observing or writing in my own journal and notes and diaries, and then ideas for artworks start from there. This is like the most basic thing an artist could say, but yeah, I think that practice has always been the start and probably the end to kind of every artistic project, is that internal initial almost shy dialogue that someone has with themselves with a certain idea, and thinking, what could this be, or what does it mean to work with this material, or why would I, what am I trying to do, even though I'm not really sure how to get there. So I think of those debt pieces very much as wanting to get somewhere, but not really knowing how to, and starting with that basic unit of text and maybe desire, and seeing what comes from that combination or recipe. Do you have a follow-up comment? If there was anything specific in that you want to speak to, I'm happy to.
I don't know if I have a follow-up comment other than like, thank you. I appreciate everything you've had to say during this time. And I definitely like, yeah, I think it just, to me, also your answer now and just hearing you talk, like, pointed out how much I take for granted certain artistic processes and not really delving into the material of like what I'm doing. And like, I'm just like, oh, like if I'm like, especially you mentioned poetry and talking about like debts. And it's like, if I'm writing poetry, I think before I would have just conceptualized like, oh, I'm just writing this, and not really thought about the paper, the pen, or like whatever item I'm using. And all, like, I think I will try and be like more observational with everything I'm doing when even creating something that I maybe would have just like processed as writing before, and not really thought about other avenues of how it, of like what went into it, and like how that actually affected what I was doing, or just affected my thinking.
Well, that's cool. You sound like a true artist, where you could just pick up anything and just be doing what you're gonna make. And I think that's really valuable too. I love that as well. Sometimes there's too much thought that goes into each little detail, but yeah, cool. Thanks for that comment. And I hope everybody has a really good semester, and you got some other really cool speakers coming in. So a funny note was that I did get, as part of this invite, all of your subsequent Zoom meetings and what days those are on. So I thought, oh, maybe I'll just come back and hear the other speakers.
That'd be great. It would be nice to have you back. And yeah, so thank you so much, Park and Stephen and Mary and everyone in media services for making the webinar work, and all of you for showing up. And see each other sometime soon. We've made
Hopefully, yeah.
some contact. All right. Okay. Take care.
Okay, well, signing off, everybody. Bye.
Bye.